But beginning this morning from John chapter 9 and verse 1, just to set some context, as Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. And so the man went and washed and came home, seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. And the story goes on. They take this man to the Pharisees for their evaluation. The Pharisees say that Jesus couldn't be God, couldn't come from God because he did the work on the Sabbath. And as the story goes on, they continue to interrogate him, they interrogate his parents, and eventually they put this blind man out of the synagogue because they don't accept his story and because he celebrates what Jesus has done in his life. Subsequent to that, Jesus goes and finds him. We're picking up in John chapter 9 verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out of the synagogue, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." And then just picking up in chapter 10, verse 7 again. Jesus continues having a discussion with the Pharisees. And in verse 7, "Therefore Jesus said again, 'Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Reading so far this morning. Give thanks to God for his word to us. Friends, Christianity, I believe, is simply about living better. It's about having a better life, and for me that is so very exciting because everybody wants to live better. You speak to people and they always tell you about how they're struggling and how difficult their life is and all the things they go through. They want to live better. And as Christ followers, we have the ability to tell them how to do that. Jesus tells us and shows us the way that we can live better, and we in turn are able to tell others. Isn't that exciting? We're talking about evangelism, and people are often nervous about evangelism. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to approach people. But the good news that Jesus gives us is that we can live lives that are better, and we can help others to live lives that are better. And there's surely good news that we should be excited to share with others. And while the good news is certainly you will go to heaven one day when you die, and that's good and well, But there's a greater step, and the greater step that says that if my faith doesn't change the way I live here and now, then perhaps it's not worth so much. My faith should change my level of joy, the level of appreciation I have for all the things that happen to me, both good and bad, in my life today. Christianity is about living better today. At its essence, Christianity isn't about doctrines, about what is right or what is wrong, who is right, who is wrong, or even who gets into heaven and who does not. The essence of Christianity is about living better today. As we look at the story of Jesus, and as we see how he encounters people, how he encountered the blind man, Jesus doesn't go to people and meet with them in the street and say, don't worry, your problems will be solved one day in heaven. When he raises dead children, he doesn't say, don't worry, one day you'll see your dead child in heaven again. He raises the child then. When Jesus sees people who are labeled blind, he doesn't say, don't worry, one day you will walk in heaven. He lifts them and helps them to walk now. And the same with his encounter with the blind man. He doesn't say, don't worry, one day you will see everything in heaven. He heals his eyes in the present moment. He changes our lives today. And so the lame go away walking, and the blind seeing, and the demon-possessed in their right minds. Salvation is about what happens now. And so everybody is looking for a better life, and everybody wants a better life today. It's very difficult for people to see into the future, to think about what happens one day when they die. And of course, you know, when you're hungry, you don't want somebody to tell you, don't worry, it'll be okay. You would prefer that somebody gives you food now that is going to take away your hunger pangs and fill your stomach. So Jesus, speaking to the Pharisees, trying to explain what has happened to this blind man and what the kingdom of heaven is about, says that he has come in order that people may have life and have it in abundance. Jesus doesn't say, I have come so that people will go to heaven one day when I die. He says, I have come so that they may have life in abundance now, that they may learn to make the right choices and live in such a way that life is deep and rich and fulfilling. And I see that as a continuation of what we began last week, when Jesus said to his disciples, I have come that you may be salt and light to the world. You are to be salt, to make the world salty, to shine your light upon the world, helping people to live better. So when we meet Jesus as the blind man met Jesus, what does that say to us about being better Christ followers and living lives that are better and helping others to live better? I think one of the dangers that we fall into often as Christ followers is that we look at our own lives and we have in our minds a picture of what a better life would mean for me. And maybe we think, well, I'd live better if I had a bit more money. Or I'd live better if I were married to a different person. Or I'd live better if these circumstances changed. I had a better job. And so often we look at somebody and say, well, they have the kind of life that I wish I had. They seem to be living better. What can I do to become like them? What can I do to get the things that they have so that I can live a better life? I wish I had a life like that. And so what happens is that we start to pray for those things. I start to pray, if only God would give me a better job. If only God would give me more money. If only God would give me this thing or that thing or the next thing. And perhaps I'm oversimplifying. I know that there are things that we should pray for. But very often I think that we make the mistake of thinking that if our needs and wants are fulfilled, we will be happy. Then we will have the abundant life that Jesus is talking about, the life in the full. I think that Jesus was saying something different in that passage. And I don't think Jesus was saying that Christianity is about fulfilling our material needs. And often we get carried away and we go down that track, and I think we make a mistake when we do it. I think Jesus was saying that the way to abundant life is to be found in our attitude and the way we approach the circumstances of our life, both good and bad. We find fullness, we find abundance in how we approach the things that happen to us. How we discover meaningful in the good meaning in the good things that are happening to us. How we discover meaning in the bad things that happen to us. And so I want to speak this morning along the story of the man born blind, and to hold that up in the light of the passage that Jesus says, I've come that they may have life in abundance. It's all part of the same story. Jesus offering the teaching, I've come that they may have life in abundance, is a response to the Pharisees who have expelled this blind man from the synagogue. So, simply want to say one thing about the story before I continue. To say simply, the story is about the presence of God when things are not good. In this blind man's life, he didn't have much of a life, but the presence of Jesus, the presence of God comes in and changes his life. Who is the Christ? How do we not know who the Jesus is, who the Christ is? The first thing as we look at the story is that we discover that Jesus and following Jesus challenges assumptions. It challenges our assumptions about how things work. When the story begins, we discover Jesus seeing a man who was born blind. Immediately his disciples, upon seeing the man, they don't speak to the man, they speak to Jesus, and they make this assumption, they make the statement, this man must be blind because of his sin. They say to Jesus, why is this man blind? Was it because of his sin or his parents' sin? There's an assumption being made. They assume that God is punishing him because either he or his parents had done something wrong. There must be a reason for the circumstances that he finds himself in. And the first thing that Jesus does in this situation is he challenges that assumption. He says, you've got it wrong. Stop thinking about God in that way. Stop thinking that God punishes somebody for something that they've done. And he says, neither sin, but this happens so that the work of God may be displayed in his life. Here is a man who needs a better life. And I wonder what he had thought would be a better life as he sat begging. Maybe one day if somebody throws a gold coin in, maybe if he gets enough money, he'll have a better life. I don't think he ever expected to be able to see again, to be able to walk again, to work again. But here is a man who needs a better life, and Jesus is going to give it to him. In fact, before healing him, what does Jesus say? He says, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And he gives the man his sight back. He allows light into the man's life. Paul prays for the Ephesians that their eyes will be opened, that their spirits will be enlightened, that will be flooded with the light of Jesus. And so Jesus, when he comes into a situation that is bad, challenges our assumptions. And I wonder what assumptions we make when we are faced with difficult circumstances. Or the assumptions that we make about people, especially when we see people needing a better life, or even ourselves. One of the assumptions that we hear often is we would look at poor people and say they're poor because they don't want to work. It's an assumption that we make. Or if I give them money, they're going to spend it on booze. Or if we look at our own life, oftentimes something bad happens and we make the assumption, just like the disciples did, that I must have done something wrong and God is punishing me. There's an assumption. And so when Jesus' followers make these assumptions, he immediately challenges them and tells them that they need to start thinking differently. This isn't as a result of something they've done wrong. This isn't because he or his parents sinned, says Jesus, but rather it is so that God can be glorified. Now, God doesn't send things on us so that we can use them to glorify God, but when bad things happen, the attitude that we approach them with brings God glory. Jesus says to his followers, to live a full life, your attitude needs to change. You need to stop making assumptions. And friends, what a freedom it is when we don't need to judge. How wonderful it is when we can stop evaluating the lives of others, trying to decide whether they're worthy or not, trying to decide what they deserve and what they don't deserve, and even in our own lives. What a freedom it is when we stop judging ourselves for everything that we do. Stop judging ourselves for the way we look. Stop judging ourselves for the mistakes that we make. You see, I mentioned last week, and it's so often we come to God not as a loving parent, but as an abusive partner. And we think, what have I done to upset God? What is God punishing me for now? And we get into this way of living in which we second guess everything that we do in case it upsets God. Friend, that's not the way to abundant life. Abundant life is not to be found in judgment of ourselves or others. I don't dance. I have no sense of rhythm. You need to understand that. But more than that, I always think that the other people are judging me. They're looking at me and saying, gee, goodness gracious me, what an idiot that guy is. And so I don't dance. Now I know in my mind that the other people are too busy thinking that they're looking stupid to worry about whether I'm looking stupid or not. But it stops me from living an abundant life. It stops me from going out and dancing and having fun and enjoying myself. Because I'm afraid of what somebody else is going to say. I'm afraid of how somebody judges me. And I think Jesus is saying, if you want to have an abundant life, you've got to get away from judging others and from expecting that others are judging you, that I am judging you, and live in a way that is free. Live in a way that we can dance. So if we're prepared to let go of our assumptions and open our eyes to the presence of God and stop seeing everything bad as a judgment, and instead start to ask the question, where can we see God's presence in this thing that is happening? Then we begin to discover the work of God in our lives. Then we begin to see God in the midst of our struggle. Just a very small example. I was flying home from Joburg on Friday afternoon, wanting to get home to Lynn, and the plane was delayed for an hour, and then we were sitting on the apron waiting to go, and everything in the aeroplane died. Oh my goodness, am I flying home in this aeroplane? But in the midst of that, I don't mind flying. I enjoy flying very much, but I find the whole airport terribly, terribly stressful. Getting to the airport on time, getting through check-in and getting through security. And once I'm on the plane, I'm happy. And so here was this protracted thing, and because the plane was delayed, they changed gates, and I was very tense. And then somehow, in the midst of that situation, a moment of grace where the person who was supposed to sit next to me wasn't on the plane. I just had a little bit of extra space. It was the only open seat in the whole plane. It was next to me, and I was grateful for that. Finding the presence of God in circumstances. The second thing I want to speak about is comforting assurance. The presence of Christ, who comes to the blind, who comes to us in our moments of difficulty, is one which offers comforting assurance. I'm amazed at the story. And maybe, this is John's Gospel, so maybe there's a deeper meaning to the story. But I'm amazed at the story where here we find this man who has been born blind and is healed by Jesus. We don't see people celebrating his healing. The community doesn't gather around and say, this is wonderful, this man who was born blind has been healed. They don't gather around and say, well, if he was a sinner, his sins must have been forgiven. The synagogue community doesn't come around and say, this is wonderful. Instead, they want to continue to find reasons to exclude him. They call him a sinner. You were steeped in sin at birth. How can you tell us what to believe? They want to find ways to keep him in a box. They don't want him having been given sight. They don't want him to be a person who's discovered sight and vision and light in his life. They want him to stay in the darkness. Interrogate him twice. They throw him out of the synagogue. Even his parents are unwilling to take his side because they're afraid that they might be getting thrown out of the synagogue as well. He was rejected by society as a beggar. Now that he's being healed, the people reject him again. So the presence of Jesus bringing light into our lives leads us to a place of asking ourselves how we treat those who are different. How do we treat those who experience God differently to the way we do? Because I think often we're like the Pharisees who are very quick to judge and want to put people back in their boxes. We're quick to make assumptions, and because we make these assumptions, we become exclusive people. You're out, you're in. You're okay, you're not. You're going to heaven, you won't. So the Pharisees put this man in the box of a sinner. He was blind because he was a sinner, and he was even more ungodly because he dared to challenge their ideas about God. See, the Pharisees came with their ideas about God, and the blind man had experienced God in this radically different way. Now he comes to the Pharisees, and they say to him, who are you to lecture us? You're a sinner at birth. Friends, I think of so many people who are not in church because they experience God differently. And the church sits in judgment over them. We judge them as not being worthy. We judge them for having the wrong ideas about God. We judge them for worshipping in ways that are different to the ways in which we worship. Sometimes they'll come to church, but they don't find the space here because we say, you're blind. Or if they come and they say, let's tell you about how we experience God, we say, no, you can't experience God in that way. We've got the truth in this place. Watch what happens in chapter 10, verse 35, 9, verse 35. When Jesus hears that he's been thrown out of the synagogue, he goes and he finds the man. Listen to that. Jesus isn't in the synagogue with those who think they are right. Jesus is out on the streets with the one who has been excluded. Jesus is out there looking for those who don't have a space in his kingdom. And he gives them the assurance that they are the ones who have in fact met God. You have seen him, says Jesus to the man who was born blind. And he goes on to say that the blind will see, and those who think they see will become blind. So how does Jesus call us to live a life that is more full? He calls us to invite in those who have been shut out. Indeed, he tells us that those are the very people he has come to be with. The real Jesus is a comforting assurance for those who have been excluded, offering them a fuller life. I was going to say lastly, I was on superintendent's course this past week, and somebody was speaking to us. He says there are two kinds of ministers. There are those who say finally and finish, and those who say lastly and last and last and last. And so my third point is an encounter with Jesus, the one who is Christ, doesn't result in greater doubt, but an added conviction of the real presence of God in our lives. And that makes life a whole lot better and a whole lot richer and a whole lot fuller. You see, sometimes I think we do theology to cover up a lack of relationship with God. And you know, all Christians are such wonderful theologians. We know all the words about God. We have all the answers down pat, just as the Pharisees and Jesus' disciples had when they encountered the man born blind. It's like a catechism question that the Jewish people would do. What causes a child to be born blind? It's a difficult question, so you've got to know the answer. What causes a man to be born blind? And the answer is his sin or his parents. What causes a child to be born blind? His sin or his parents? It's an entrenched theological position. And so when his disciples are walking with Jesus and they see the blind man, it's the obvious answer. What caused this man to be born blind? Was it his sin or his parents? Friends, I think we have those same things in our own lives. We may have come to know Christ through a wonderful experience of healing or giving our heart to Jesus or whatever it was. But before long, we are taught what to believe about Jesus. As soon as we become a Christian, people start telling us, this is how you should be acting. This is what you should believe. These are the words you should be saying. This is the way we speak as Christ followers. I have a sermon which I preach called Why I Don't Say Grace. Because grace is one of those things, you come into the church, now you're a Christian, you must say grace before the meal. They're entrenched theological positions that we just accept and we don't often question. But what should happen in this encounter with Christ? The man is summoned to appear before the Pharisees and they ask him to explain about Jesus. This man hasn't got theology yet. And he says simply these words, a couple of times. The man says, I do not know. I do not know. I cannot begin to explain who this man is. But one thing I do know, I was blind and now I see. He speaks about the experience instead of theology. I think sometimes we would be better Christians if we stopped knowing what Jesus can and can't do. If we stop knowing so well who Jesus is and how to explain him. You see, we don't need a theology of the mind. We need an experience of the heart. Now, I'm a theologian and I love doing theology. I've got a master's degree in theology. But I think that we would all live a life that is much better if we could forget all the theology we've learned. And instead of trying to put our experience of God into words that sometimes become exclusive to others, into words that dictate who God is and who God is not, and what God can do and what God can't do, I think we need to move to a place where we can simply say to others, I do not know who God is, but I know what God has done. That's what Jesus says to the Pharisees. You live better, you have a fuller life when you allow God to be bigger than your wildest imaginings. You live fuller when you forget all you've learnt about God and start to know God in your heart. So friends, let me close. We're speaking during these 6 weeks about how to live as salty Christians, and I want to conclude with a thought that I began last week. I said that there needs to be just enough salt in our lives. Sometimes we have too little, but most often we have too much salt. But you know, food that has too much salt is just as unpleasant as food that has too little. Christians who are overzealous don't really make life better for anybody. Those who aren't Christians may well be put off by the Bible bashing and the assumptions and the categorizing of who is in and who is out. And even too little salt doesn't attract people to Jesus. Here's what I think. When a meal is well made, you don't need to add too much salt to it. all the flavors and the spices complement each other. You're left with a tasty dish. It's when a meal isn't tasty that we try to add salt to give it some sort of flavor. And I think that as Christ followers, very often, we're inclined to become too salty when our life doesn't have too much of the real Jesus in it. And so we overcompensate, just as the Pharisees did. Jesus says, I have come that they may have life to the full. The road, the way, the path into fullness isn't through theology, isn't through assumptions about others, through checking if a person is good, but through a genuine encounter with Jesus. An encounter that challenges our assumptions, an encounter that assures us of his comfort, and an encounter that fills us with conviction. And when we go out, we're not too salty, but we have just enough salt to make the world a tastier place for those around us. I pray that it would be so for you as for me. Amen. Shall we spend a moment in prayer, and as we do that, the screen can come down for the video. Let's pray. And so, Lord God, as we have heard your word to us this morning, we are in a place of evaluating our own lives. We may have recognized that sometimes we say too much because we know too little. We have recognized that sometimes it's easier to have a theology of mind than an experience of the heart. And so, Lord, we pray that you would lead us into a place of experience. That you would lead us into a place where we know your love. That you would lead us into a place where we stop knowing and start believing. Lead us into a place where it's not about what we know in our heads, but what we have experienced in our hearts. I do not know who this man is, but one thing I do know. I was blind, and now I see. And so, Lord, fill our hearts with your light, that we may become people of salt and light in this broken world. For we pray this in your name. Amen.